add another high modern finish to his resume. He's against the youngster. That's Jonathan Sukenik over on the left, 4-color control. He's your number 8 seed. On his 4th Star City Open top 8, still does not have a win.
A player who used to contribute content for StarCityGames.com, someone who actually has periodically appeared in the booth back during some earlier eras of SCG Live, known Magic Online grinder, good all-around person, someone I've known since he was a mere lad playing in some JSS tournaments, the only game in town in New Jersey.
All right, we'll start. Seth Manfield on the play. He's going to start with Serum Visions. And there's that window at the beginning of the game where Blue-Red Twin, until they have 3 mana, where you kind of get to resolve spells. And after that, it's really breaks on. We'll see what Jonathan can do with his first 2 turns. He doesn't actually have too much proactive there.
No,
Probably
he does
just
not.
lands.
And another problem for Jonathan in the matchup is one of his key threat cards, his source of pressure, is Lingering Souls. Lingering Souls is a pretty cumbersome card against Splinter Twin. Tapping out in your main phase is not something you're looking to do, and the clock it provides is not particularly strong either.
All right, turn 2 with Seth Manfield. Going to go ahead and just get a Steam Vent. And look at this. This is because he knows the deck list. Seth is main phase fetching. There are 2 copies of Shadow of Doubt in Sukenik's main deck.
I brought this up before. It's sort of the stifle of the format for those of you who are familiar with Legacy.
Even more so, almost. But yeah, continue.
Right. I mean, it's relatively easy to play around once you're informed about it. It's 2 mana, which is a lot to leave up, but it does pressure you to sacrifice your fetch lands at particular times.
So the main phase sacrifice of a fetch land, Seth does that, and then casts his Serum Visions. So very, very alert sequencing here from Manfield. So then he'll pass back to Sukenik on the turn 2. And I don't believe Jonathan has the Shadow of Doubt. He does have a copy of Mana Leak.
Mana Leak very important for Jonathan while he's on the draw here. He needs to have interaction available very, very early.
So one thing about Shadow of Doubt, if your opponents always know you have it, like that it's in your deck list, how do you feel about the card at that point? Like if you don't get the surprise factor, you know, like in this top 4 match, for example, does it really do much?
Just cast it. Just when
cycle
you got
it.
2 mana
All
and
right.
you cycle it, just cycle it away.
And now we're on the danger turn. Seth sets up. It's a Tectonic Edge. No second red just yet. He'll almost certainly just pass the turn back, though. Maybe make a cantrip. And he'll pass. And now that staring contest between the 2 decks will begin.
And Lightning Helix, the draw here for Jonathan, and now you can start to see the difference between Deceiver, Exarch, and Pestermite on Seth's side of the table. Trivial for Jonathan to kill Pestermite. Deceiver, Exarch, much more challenging.
Yeah, that 4th point of toughness really insulates it against John's answers. And he'll pass, and Seth will just go ahead and go for this end step. He'll try for a Deceiver Exarch. Sukenik does have a copy of Mana Leak in hand.
And this is a no-brainer. As long as Jonathan can keep Deceiver, Exarch off the table, he's got a lot of game against Seth's deck.
So untap for Seth. First Exarch does not succeed. To you, is that telling that Seth may have another Deceiver Exarch going on?
It is a little rough for Seth to run into a Mana Leak there, unless he has another copy. On the other hand, if Jonathan's reaction there is Path to Exile or Remand, that's not the end of the world for Seth. So it could be a calculated risk, but most likely represents that he has another copy of Deceiver Exarch in hand.
So Seth gets untapped. You can see here, Seth's certainly a player to play his cards close to the chest, you could see. Not Fortland is stomping ground.
Yeah, usually the players we have on camera are quite cooperative, but I don't mind the mysteries
No,
either.
no, it's you almost feel like you're watching the game from Jonathan's point of view. And he's going to, for the turn, play Tectonic Edge and go for Seth's Tectonic Edge. I like the play here, actually, from Jonathan. Lands certainly seem to be more valuable on his side of the table.
Right, and he's doing all this while holding priority, so the Tectonic Edge is in the graveyard by the time Seth is in a position to respond. And at that point, there's not 4 lands in play on Jonathan's side of the table.
You know, every time on Magic Online I try to do this, I screw it up. When I try to hold priority with my own spells and abilities, it's the worst.
Oh yeah, no, I think Rites of Initiation plus the Threshold Fervor, or sorry, not Fervor effect, but Creatures Can't Block effect, I've lost a lot of games.
Remanding your own spells, that's tough stuff, man.
Yep.
All right, Pestermite is going to be cast in response to that Tectonic Edge activation.
Or Searing Blaze in response. Searing Blaze, the same guy for lethal when it's 3 toughness or less. That's come up for me a few times.
Yes. Okay, that's a neat one. I haven't heard that one, but that's good.
Yeah, all the angles.
Lightning Helix takes out Pestermite, so Seth still having trouble landing one of those creatures. Now he'll lose the land. And right now, Jonathan, getting to trade. You said there's a difference between Pestermite and Lightning Helix. Probably Pestermite and Deceiver Exarch. Lightning Helix is able to trade with Pestermite.
Yeah, and now we're getting to the stage where Jonathan might be able to get to Cryptic Command, and at that point he has a lot of control over the way the game gets played out.
Main phase Thought Scar from Seth Manfield mills 2 cards, one of which is one of his copies of Splinter Twin. I was a little surprised to have seen Seth just jamming all the creatures this early into open mana.
I mean, depending on what his hand looks like, he might just have to push through like this. As the game gets later and later, things like Snapcaster Mage start to become considerations, Cryptic Command. So by trying to jam early, yes, there are some risks. You know, the Deceiver Exarch running into Mana Leak, that's very bad for Seth. But once we start hitting this stage of the game, there's a whole new wave of cards he has to try to beat, and it's not easy for him to do.
Well, you said it earlier. If the removal lines up correctly for Jonathan, he can get one of these games. So far, it has done just that. So he plays his 4th land here. It lands 5 and 6 in Jonathan's hand, along with copy of Cryptic Command. Looks like Path to Exile. And now the draw for the turn is, a Lightning Bolt as well. A lot of weapons. Remand as well.
He can just sit. There is no rush on Jonathan's side of the table.
It really does feel like Jonathan's just playing a Jess Sky deck in this matchup. I know he does have black cards, but I'm not even sure how much they matter in this one.
No, not really. Lingering Souls, like I said before, I think is among his weaker cards in the matchup. And Mystical Teachings is kind of some pie-in-the-sky stuff that's going to get flashback.
Yeah, so it's like, you can hark back to, when Jeskai Control was big and it would play against Twin. It felt oftentimes the same way. If you lined up with the early removal, you usually could bully the Twin decks.
Now, last turn, Seth played a copy of Desolate Lighthouse, and I think that's a huge card for him in the matchup, particularly when the game's like this, where, who knows if Seth has anything really proactive to do, but in any case, he doesn't want to start throwing stuff into Cryptic Commands and so forth. So Desolate Lighthouse gives us an opportunity to sculpt a pretty powerful hand. And you can see on the other side of the table, it kind of compels Jonathan to make a move here with Lingering Souls, because before he was happy to just sit here all day long and play draw to draw with Seth, but now with Desolate Lighthouse, he kind of has to make a move.
Yeah, Lingering Souls now cast by Jonathan, so he's going to make his first aggressive play. We'll see how Manfield responds. Looks like the Souls has resolved, but on end step, Seth is going to start fetching for Steam Vents. Maybe loot with the Lighthouse. Seth's still with a pretty full grip. He's gotten 1-for-1 twice, but other than that, everything's been a cantrip.
Right, but in terms of card count, he's in a fine place, but the problem is that it's at some point becomes about text box to text box. He just doesn't have a lot of significant cards in this deck once we hit this stage.
And end step will just be looting. And second copy of Splinter Twin discarded. It seems to me that Seth, at this point, maybe he's not even trying for the twin combo as much as to get a tempo game plan.
Yeah, perhaps he's just given up on that, at least for the time being. He still needs to do something with all this mana and cards in hand to leverage it, but I think he's realized that trying to jam the combo at this stage, not very productive. Also, it's possible that he's just run out of Pestermites and Deceiver Exarch for the time being and can't afford to sit on his Splinter Twins while he's trying to sculpt up a hand that can compete with Jonathan's.
And now Seth getting to untap with 5 lands in play. Not much that he does at Sorcery Speed in the deck, other than casting a couple 1-mana spells. A Flame Slash will take care of a Lingering Souls token. That's great news if you're Jonathan.
I mean, that's very interesting that he did not elect to loot that away with his Desolate Lighthouse, because that's a pretty anemic trade. I think that is representative of having a very weak hand at this stage. If he's got a lot of cards in hand, worse than a Flame Slash in that spot.
Yeah. Going to the other side of the bracket, we do have an update, and let me tell you, we've had him so far 8-0 on camera, and no sign of stopping. Gerard Fabiano takes the first game over Jeffrey Follinus.
He's just been on a tear.
Absolutely.
On a complete tear.
4-1-1 today. His only loss was to Hugo Rodriguez, but Hugo knocked out of the tournament by Jonathan last round.
I mean, Gerard's on the heels of his second Open Series win in 2015 and his second format win. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, really starting in with a really hot streak in November, or December rather, and these last 3 months have just been great for Gerard.
Yep. I mean, won a Grand Prix in the city not that long ago.
Shadow of Doubt cycled for Jonathan. Swing with a Spirit Token. Seth Manfield down to 16. And unable to really get anything going in those early turns. It seems like Seth just doesn't have many threats to deploy. Jonathan able to leave up all this mana.
And with Jonathan having the amount of mana that he has, I'm a little bit surprised that he hasn't taken an opportunity to find black mana with his Scalding Tarn.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing.
And flashback the Lingering Souls. If something happens on the flashback, if it gets countered or something, Jonathan doesn't really care about that. And if it sticks, you're shortening up the game. And against an opponent with Desolate Lighthouse, yes, things are going well for Jonathan right now, but I still want to push that advantage. You don't want to give Seth all the time in the world to set up a hand that can power through all of your counters.
It certainly is a show of strength by Jonathan to not make that play, saying, you know, that really he just doesn't need more of a clock. He wants to develop the game too, feeling that if they just trade card draws for card draws, that Jonathan will pull ahead, even despite the Desolate Lighthouse from Seth.
I don't know. With Seth, I agree that Jonathan has a pretty big edge from this stage no matter what. But with Seth on 16, I mean, this is a real slow burn, only hitting for 1 a turn.
Serum Visions play there from Seth. Yeah, 2 black lands in Jonathan's deck. He has 1 copy of Blood Crypt and 1 copy of Godless Shrine.
So the Tarn could have gotten the Blood Crypt. So the black mana has been available.
Right. Yeah, you have a white-red, you have black-red and black-white. So both these fetches could get a black mana if they wanted to.
Can you please come to the main stage?
Serum Visions resolves for Seth. And he's going to continue passing. All right, so if you're Seth Manfield, eventually you have to do something aggressive here. You know, Jonathan's the control deck. You have a lot of time to sculpt your hand. What are you sculpting it for? What are we getting to?
I think at this stage, it's pretty hard to imagine winning by things like Snapcaster Mage and Vendilion Click. Even setting aside the Lingering Souls tokens that match up very well there, Jonathan at this point has probably just generated too much card advantage and his hand is too powerful. So I think that you have to go down the combo route. I think you just have to try to sneak in a win that way. Sculpt up the hand as best you can with a lot of cheap permission and try to push something through. It's going to be really hard, but I think the alternative of trying to win, you know, whatever you want to call it, manual style, non-combo, I think that's going to be really hard to do.
Right now he has 2 Splintertons remaining, 3 Exarchs, and 1 Pestermite if you want to put that combo together, but limited number of those cards even in Seth's deck. So the hand he's trying to sculpt to maybe be the combo, plus a Dispel perhaps, a Dispel and maybe some number of Remands.
Something like that, yeah.
Player 6 IQ.
Interesting, if you want to fight a big counter fight, actually Cryptic Command not usually the weapon you want. Either way, Jonathan Sukenik is going to go ahead and end up fetch for that Blood Crypt. Swings for 1, puts Seth, and then passes the turn. So does get the black mana, but doesn't actually use it. He cracked both his fetches.
Well, the problem from Jonathan's side right now, he's on 7 mana. So if he flashes back Lingering Souls, he goes down to 5 mana and really only has Cryptic Command to defend himself. That may not be enough. So
He wants an 8th land.
I think so. It would not surprise me if Jonathan did something like Bolt You, Snapcaster, Bolt You, because his hand's getting a little clawed right now. He could use some extra pressure in play. And the second copy of Snapcaster Mage is not really helping him if the game comes down to a counterspell war. But flashing back the Lingering Souls right now maybe is actually more risky than I initially had perceived it to be, because Jonathan has to go down to 5 mana, and that's just not a lot of resistance left over.
Yeah, and Seth's buying so much time. It is not, you saw Seth discard a Splinter Twin, and Seth has just been looting ever since. It is not unreasonable to think that Seth has both halves of the combo plus 1 piece of offensive counter magic. So you probably want to be able to beat 2 pieces of magic. Or you want to be able to beat the first one. You do see, this is what you talked about, the Snapcaster Mage end step here.
And it looks like he's going for
Shadow Doubt. Just going to go for the card advantage. And Seth, well, he has a lot of mana, a lot of time. He'll just take the card advantage. He'll remand the Shadow of Doubt. Jonathan's Snapcaster Mage just turning into a vanilla 2/1. Seth not really having to spend a card to stop it either.
Yeah, and the Snapcaster Mage just a concession to Jonathan's mana. He needs to put some stuff into play. A lot of his mana is committed to holding up this counterspell wall. So when he gets opportunities at instant speed to add to his board, he kind of has to do it even if they aren't the most efficient trades.
And now some aggression here from Seth. Now that he has Jonathan low on mana, he's going to go for Vendilion Click. This is still all on Seth's end step. Jonathan will remand. And will Seth fight? Yes, absolutely. There's not too much danger to Seth tapping out on his own turn.
No, not really. I mean, Jonathan, the biggest thing he can follow up with is something like Sphinx's Revelation, I suppose, which definitely not good news for Seth, but doesn't stop him from being able to execute his combo at some point.
And look, the fact that Seth has all the time in the world and all this mana is just allowing him to continue to make high-value plays. He goes for the Vendilion Click, Jonathan tries to remand, and then Seth remands his own Vendilion Click. So Seth is still even on cards, whereas Jonathan is down another card from that interaction.
The flip side is now with Seth tapped out on Jonathan's turn, this is a great opportunity to just cast a bunch of Lingering Souls or something.
Yeah, get a clock.
Get a little bit more going and on in play. Because there's no threat of Seth untapping and killing you. He needs to have a non-summoning sick creature to be able to do that.
So 3 damage from the attackers here. You see in Seth's hand, it looks like he has another copy of maybe Lingering Souls, Lightning Bolts. He could really get a clock on here, and he's probably wants to do that. Yeah, Lingering Souls, Lightning Bolt, Snapcaster in his hand. We'll see just how many creatures Jonathan decides to commit.
Right, the worry here is that if he taps down low enough, Seth may have an opportunity to cast Vendilion click away the Cryptic Command, and then that might be a window for Seth to execute the combo.
Really interesting setup here by Seth Manfield.
Yeah,
Not going for the early kill at all.
The one Desolate Lighthouse has just been such a big deal. I think that without that card, we could have sat here for a very long time, and Jonathan would have been really happy to play the game out that way. But you get the sense that Seth is building towards a hand that can push through Jonathan's resistance.
Well, he certainly has been building towards something. And go back, see just what Jonathan wants to do with his turn. I guess ideally he'd want to represent a 2-turn clock here. He's going to go ahead and play and flashback Lingering Souls to get 4 more tokens. So a pretty big commitment by John. I was wondering whether he's going to commit 2 or 4. He's going with the full 4. That's 7 power on the board, which actually could be a kill next turn because he has Bolt, Snapcaster, Bolt and Snapcaster Mage in his hand. So John's gone for the I'm going to kill you next turn line.
And this is his window to do it. You know, he kind of had to sit on his hands the whole time.
Yeah.
Because of the risk of Seth killing him. And now with Seth's shields down, that's just his opportunity. He's got to get the sorceries out of his hand, got to get something going on the board.
Well, so he had some options, right? He could have just gone for half of Lingering Souls and said, I have a 2-turn clock and counter magic, or this play, which is I have a 1-turn clock, but I'm going to tap low again.
Right. The problem is the Lingering Souls are so cumbersome that I think you just have to err on the side of getting them out of your hand when you have a reasonable opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Last turn with Seth having no mana available, that was the spot to do it.
Yeah, and even if Jonathan, I think you know that the Bolt plus Snapcaster plan is unlikely to finish off Seth. He probably has something like a Dispel or maybe a Remand for the flashback of the Bolt or something like that in his hand to not let that work. But still a strong enough showing on Jonathan's side that it's worth doing. And just as you mentioned, on the untap, now Seth gets to make Vendilion Click. And if you're Jonathan, do you throw some Lightning Bolts out of your hand right now?
I do not, because Seth, if he has to go off with Pestermite and not Deceiver Exarch, the Bolt is still very valuable.
Only 1 Pestermite remains in Seth's deck, but you're absolutely right.
And if Seth puts Lightning Bolt on the bottom and leaves you with Snapcaster Mage and Cryptic Command, you're not sad about that either. So I don't think that's the right spot to just throw in the Bolt.
Seth gets to see those 3, Bolt, Snapcaster, and Cryptic. Where does he want to go from here? Really interesting spot here for Seth Manfield.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a great hand for him to see. 3 very, very powerful cards.
He'll get rid of Snapcaster Mage, which I do like if he has the Deceiver Exarch. This does take away Jonathan's ability to kill him next turn. But now he has to fight through Cryptic Command. Maybe if he has a Dispel, he can do that. Drop for Jonathan, not much help. It's Celestial Colonnade off the Vendilion Click. And without the Snapcaster, it really changes what Jonathan can do with the Bolt. It becomes much more of a control card than a burn spell.
Right. I mean, Seth still has to have a pretty potent hand to be able to win the game from this spot.
Probably needs an Exarch, a Splinter Twin, a Dispel, and perhaps a Remand as well.
But he has been able to sit here for a while and build up a pretty good hand.
It's not out of the question that he has those things. See where he goes from here. Back over to Jonathan's turn. Now gets to untap with 7 power on the board. Here's a swing with the team. Vendilion Click perhaps can jump in the way of Snapcaster Mage and attempt to buy Seth an extra turn.
Yep.
That's what it's going to do. 5 damage comes across. Seems fine by Jonathan. And Lightning Bolt from Seth will actually get rid of a Lingering Souls token as well. This bolt's not particularly good from Seth's side.
Yeah, not a lot else to do with them, so.
Seth drops to 8 on the attack. And despite, you mentioned Lingering Souls being pretty clunky in the matchup, really hard to tap out for as a 3-mana sorcery, completely agree, but as we've seen with Jonathan, the payoff is pretty high. If the game is a point where Jonathan can use them, these 1/1s are really... Seth is not very well equipped to answer an army of them.
Well, the really nice thing about him is it almost forces Seth to have to combo off, because trying to win with the Snapcaster Mage Vendilion Click value game, he's not equipped to do that against Lingering Souls. So
yeah, it's one card that can force him to combo.
It's inefficient early on in the game. We saw spots where Jonathan could not afford to cast Lingering Souls, but once we hit this stage, it does put a lot of pressure on Seth to go off through the combo, because winning in a more conventional way is, or the other way rather, excuse me, is very hard to do.
All right, flashback Lingering Souls from Jonathan, and he passes the turn, and what a great spot here for him. Seth looting on end step, not making an X-Arc.
Yeah, great news.
And while he's tapped out, Jonathan's going to take advantage. He'll Lightning Bolt Seth. That puts him down to 5. And the number of routes Seth can have here have gotten smaller.
Yep, and now, you know, even if Seth does have the combo in hand, Jonathan's saying you got to pair that with Cryptic Command to get out of combat this turn.
And then a way to answer Jonathan's Cryptic, which both players know he has.
Right, it's a pretty big squeeze.
Sulfur Falls, the play for Seth. That's land number 9. He will just pass. It's got to be a Cryptic for him to survive. And he's got to be able to defend it from, well, Jonathan's Cryptic. Draws for the turn. And there's also difficulty, so the way that Cryptic Command works, if Seth taps the team, Jonathan also has the option of just activating Celestial Colonnade after the tap and still pushing damage in.
Right, and he has the mana left over to Snapcaster and Bolt as well.
So go to attacks from Jonathan. Seth will loot in response, discarding a Steam Vents. And says it's okay, Jonathan swinging 6 spirits, that should be good enough. Behind that Cryptic Command. Seth still with a really full grip, 4 cards. And it's not gonna be enough. Game 1 over to Jonathan Sukenik.
Definitely a scary game for Jonathan, even though if you just look at all the plays that got made, he was ahead the entire time.
But he never knew that.
Right, he never knew. He never knew for sure. But he did a very good job of adding pressure to his board when he had opportunities to do so, holding up a wall of counters when that was appropriate, and is able to get game 1.
And that's gonna be one of the more interesting parts. So the entire game, Seth has a 5-card hand. Jonathan never gets to see it. He has to play around cards that he doesn't know whether or not they're there. And then there's this letdown moment where it's like he never gets the confirmation at the end of the game of, did I play around the right things? It's not like, you know, he gets to see Seth's hand at the end of the game.
Right. I mean,
He just doesn't know.
His plays were very well reasoned, and he came away with a win. So it's hard to be too upset with how you played, but Splinter Twins are very stressful deck to play against, and they have so many tricks that it's hard to be certain. But I think Jonathan did a very good job of pushing when the coast was clear and sitting back and protecting himself when the coast was not clear.
So as Modern shapes up here, we have both of our top 4 matches between Blue-Red Twin and a control deck. Both the control decks up a game. Jonathan Sukenik here over Seth Manfield. Over on the other side of the bracket, Gerard Fabiano taking game 1 off Jeffrey Fallenus. And we may have a slugging control matchup in the finals.
Yep.
And all right. He's played sideboard for game 2. One of the things that we've been talking about all weekend, this is SCG Game Night. This was something that was launched about just 3-4 months ago. It's a promotion where your store can put on Star City SCG Game Night. It makes one of their tournaments any night of the week game night. You get a collection, the stores will get sent tokens and pins as prizes for the event.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be a very casual, flexible, organized play. You can run the events sanctioned or unsanctioned, whatever format you want. Just get players in your source for some fun and friendly Magic. It is too late to get signed up for the March kit that you see in front of you here, but if you want to get signed up for April, head over to StarCityGames.com/game night or contact your Star City Games organized play representative.
All right, back into our match. So game one, it was pretty hard for Seth to put together that twin combo. We saw him actually discarding copies of Splinter Twin. A lot of times we see the twin players get away from the combo. Game two, let's look at the sideboards.
Right, so on Seth's side, we got a Batter Skull, 2 Engineered Explosives, a Spell Skype, 2 copies of Sower of Temptation, 2 copies of Blood Moon, 3 Ancient Grudges, a Dispel, a Negate, a Keranos God of Storms, and a Jace Architect of Thought. I really like doing a swap into a control deck here in Seth's position, backed up by Blood Moon, which Jonathan's deck is quite vulnerable to. So I think you're going to see the Jace, the Keranos, the various counter spells, and the 2 copies of Blood Moon all come in here in an attempt to either outlast Jonathan or just sneak Blood Moon into play and incapacitate most of Jonathan's spells.
Yeah, and we have seen that Gerard's deck last round dodging Blood Moons from Jeff Hoagland. Sukenik's deck is far more vulnerable to it. His basic land count is 3 islands and 1 plains. And granted, he actually does play mountain red in his deck, so turning all your lands into mountains is not as backbreaking. But because a lot of his lands are actually just regular dual lands, things like Glacial Fortress, Celestial Colonnade, Sulphur Falls, he cannot freely find his basics as easily.
Right. I mean, you saw Gerard's deck in the quarterfinals, its vulnerability to Blood Moon, and Jonathan's deck is even more vulnerable than that. So, yes, he can work around it. Some of his draws allow him to play through it, but I think Seth's definitely going to bring it.
Yeah, I think almost one of the ways to describe why it's good. So Gerard's deck, because it's based around threats like Thragtusk or disruption like Inquisition of Kozilek, if you leave Gerard with a stack of, say, a stack of mountains, 1 island, 1 swamp, 1 forest, Gerard can still play a reasonable game of Magic. But for Sukenik, if you leave him with maybe 1 plains, 1 island, and a bunch of mountains, his game plan against Twin revolves around a lot of counterspell fights, and you need a lot of islands to have that counterspell fight.
Exactly, particularly when some of his counterspells are either Cryptic Command or Snapcaster Mage getting back a counterspell. That's a lot of pressure on you to have a variety of blue mana, and Jonathan only with 3 basic islands in the list, so very hard to do.
Yeah, so certainly he'll go for that plan. Now, Jonathan Sukenik, he has a 15-card sideboard here.
Yeah, he has a Wear Tear, a Counterflux, a Jace Architect of Thought, a Dispel, a Negate, a Ghost Quarter, a Crucible of Worlds, and even Mind Sensor, a Gideon Jura, a Baneslayer Angel, a Timely Reinforcements, Celestial Purge, Kataki War's Wage, and Sturdy Silence. The counter spells in Dispel and Negate, Counterflux especially very good here, and 1 copy of Wear Tear, very flexible as well. And Wear Tear very valuable here as an answer to Splinter Twin, as an answer to Blood Moon.
Yeah, and he does have a lot of answers though, right? Dispel, Negate, Counterflux, Celestial Purge, actually pretty good here.
Well, Celestial Purge
perhaps.
is a weird card because when it is very good in response to someone activating their copy of Splinter Twin, but if they're aware of Celestial Purge, they can actually sit there and wait and force for you to hold up 2 mana the entire time, which gives the other player an opportunity to find a counterspell and eventually counter your Celestial Purge. So it's okay, but it does come with some issues.
Now, if you're Jonathan, do you also go toward Jace Architect of Thought? You know that Seth is going to do that. And if you do get into a control fight, he's a good card, but man, he sure still is a 4-mana sorcery.
Right, I'm very scary about adding more 4-mana sorcery speed cards to the deck. I think that Jace is reasonably powerful in the matchup. For me, it's about a coin flip. I think because Jonathan has enough not very good cards in his deck here, Shadow of Doubt, Lightning Helix, some number of Lingering Souls, he's got stuff to cut. I think that Jace is probably going to come in.
Yeah. Imagine that. Wear Tear as well. He needs to make sure he has some answers to Blood Moon. Celestial Purge, actually, if you expect Seth to be Blood Mooning, remember, they have access to each other's deck list. Stock does rise in that card a bit.
Yeah, Keranos as well, so I think the Celestial Purge is reasonable. Not a great answer to Splinter Twin itself because of the awkwardness, but there's enough other things going on here where I think it's fine to bring in.
The awkwardness is what? You have to let the twin resolve first, which...
And then if they're aware you have Celestial Purge, they can just say go, and then you're forced to hold up the mana. It's very good in response to an activation, but if they just pass the turn, you can get into some weird instant speed battles.
Even then, if they, there's situations where if then they activate and they have mana up and you purge, they can Pestermite their own guy in response and continue to combo.
Right, I mean, against people who are sloppy or if their hands force, it can be okay, but there's enough other red permanents in Seth's deck, especially Blood Moon and Keranos, that I'm sure it's coming in.
All right, we're underway game 2. Seth Manfield down a game. He was on the play game 1. Maybe he'll have better luck on this game. Last game was pretty interesting. We saw Seth jam some 3-mana creatures at the beginning of the game. Jonathan answered the first 2, and from there, Seth was never able to mount an offense. And both players on 7 will go ahead and keep here, starting off with just some trading of lands, as we kind of are to expect in this matchup.
Yep. Early on, there's not a whole lot to be done. Some land drops, maybe some cantrips, but not a lot to be done.
Yeah, steam vents from both players. Seth fetching for his. The action's really going to start on turn 3, imagine here. Or maybe lack of action, as it were.
Well, Seth's got his 3-mana plays to combo off with Splinter Twin. He also has Blood Moon. Blood Moon, I think he's going to try to do a little bit more finagling with, because it's so powerful that if he can set it up, it's going to win the game a huge percentage of the time.
You don't just want it getting mana leaked.
Right.
Okay. Another fetch from Seth. And once again, still playing around those Shadow of Doubts. We saw him do it last game.
Right. Probably not in Jonathan's deck at this point, but better safe than sorry.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're willing to play 2 Shadow of Doubts in your main deck, you might be willing to keep some in after board, you know.
I think
if you want to get someone, you got to get them.
No, I definitely can respect the get 'em strategy. The other side of it is that you're very unlikely to get him.
Absolutely. Pass back to Jonathan. He's going to go ahead and crack a fetch land on his turn as well. And both players waiting around. We'll have action probably starting on the next turn. For Jonathan, it involves cards like Lingering Souls. For Seth, 3-mana flash creatures. You see Jonathan at the ready here, though. He does have Mana Leak, Path to Exile, Mystical Teachings all in his hand. A lot of answers. Seth, no turn 3 play on end step yet. And just a 4th land, it's going to be an island. Now, eventually, this will force Seth's hand, I'd imagine, right? If he doesn't have Desolate Lighthouse, he can't just play land go with Jonathan.
Well, he can hope that Jonathan misses a land drop, or he can hope that Jonathan just doesn't have a lot to be doing. Now, the Desolate Lighthouse is excellent for Seth in this position, but even without it, it doesn't necessarily mean he's got to be moving that fast. Remember that he also has Blood Moon to play to in all of this. So he might try to set up a sequence of initiate a fight at the end of your turn, untap, and try to jam Blood Moon.
Now, overloading Jonathan's end step here. And he's just still gearing up for that. His turn 4 was a Serum Visions.
And that's really the new dimension in the matchup post-board. If Seth tries to initiate a battle at the end of the turn with Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch in game 1, if Jonathan wins, it's a dead end. There's not much that Seth can do to follow up with. Post-board, the threat of Blood Moon gives Seth a way to effectively win the game in a bunch of positions, even from an empty board, which colors the way that Jonathan has to fight over stuff.
You see Jonathan here, still fetching for dual lands at this point. Not really setting up for a possible Blood Moon, hoping to just keep it off the table.
Well, he needs a variety of colored mana to enable Cryptic Command at this stage, and his deck is not very good at operating even if Blood Moon resolves. So yes, he can try fetching some basics, but I think he's better served just getting his colored mana online and trying to win the fight over Blood Moon.
I've seen end step Electrolyze there from Jonathan, just dealing 2 to Seth, drawing a card.
Also, Jonathan already has his 1 basic planes in hand. Another reason.
All right, well, then can't fetch for it for sure. And full grip still for Jonathan. Cantrips there. Has Spell Snare, Mana Leak, Mystical Teachings, Path to Exile, another Mana Leak, some lands. Pretty well positioned right now. I'm just going to make Seth he's going to basically force Seth to make the first move.
I mean, with a hand of Spell Snare, Mana Leak, Mystical Teachings. The Teachings is very nice here because it finally gives something Jonathan to do if Seth says, all right, it's your turn again.
Assuming Jonathan even knows what he wants to do yet. Is there an instant that he really wants to find at this point?
I really like finding a copy of Wear Tear, as that's a very cheap way to not have to worry about Blood Moon. He can try to find something more proactive, I suppose.
You could actually find Snapcaster Mage.
Celestial Purge also fits into that camp, but I do think that he's well served here, getting a cheap way to get Blood Moon off of the table.
Well, we will see which way Jonathan goes. End step, Mystical Teachings. A lot of options. I mean, basically his whole deck.
Because this cat and mouse game definitely favors Jonathan right now. Both players are just making their land drops. And it becomes extremely favorable for Jonathan if he has some way to answer a Blood Moon that sneaks onto the table. And float some white mana, try to push through a Wear Terror or Celestial Purge.
What he goes for here. So Jonathan still, all his cards cantripping, still has a 7-card hand as the players continue to trade lands back and forth. And he's going to go just for the real trump of a counterspell. This is going to be Counterflux.
Counterflux is pretty powerful in the spot, but if the concern is Blood Moon, this is not one of the more efficient cards to go get.
Now he's seen that, we'll see Seth go ahead and go for Vendilion Click whilst Jonathan's tapped out. So Counterflux is there. You can see the rest of it. We knew it. It is Mana Leak. Mana Leak, Path to Exile, 2 more lands. Pretty decent spot to be here.
Pretty powerful hand, and I like getting Counterflux here from Jonathan's side with more land drops to make. The big risk here is getting bottlenecked on mana. But if Jonathan can continue to make his land drops, Counterflux is just very powerful, very flexible. Can also dead Blood Moon alongside any other action that Seth tries to initiate.
Yeah, certainly a lot of counterspells to fight through, but this knowledge very important for Seth.
Absolutely.
And what I do like, what Seth can do is right now, all of Jonathan's spell hand is full of counter spells. So by taking something like Path to Exile, you do force Jonathan really to hold up a lot of mana here.
Right, like it pass off the table, let's say. Then what happens with this hand if, Seth just plays land number 6, says go, and plays either Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch. You don't really want to use 2 mana leaks in that spot. You really don't want to path Seth with 2 mana leaks in your hand. And you certainly don't want to use your Counterflux.
Seth takes the Spell Snare out of Jonathan's hand. And what that says, so Spell Snare is probably the best card in a counter war.
Right. And that might mean that Seth is trying to set up either a Splinter Twin kill or initiate some battle at the end of Jonathan's turn, untap, and land Blood Moon.
So here another land drawn for Jonathan. He'll play a fetch land. And just past the turn, Seth gets to untap. So with a 3-1 in play, Seth does have somewhat of a clock. He could eventually pressure Jonathan into playing that Path to Exile. And we'll see how soon. Not just yet. Vendilion Click will swing in. Jonathan down to 13. And we'll see if Seth has land number 6. Do not believe he does. And Jonathan drawing a pretty decent answer here. That's going to be a copy of Electrolyze, killing Vendilion Click and 1 to Seth, drawing a card.
Right. And the more that Seth can get, Jonathan can rather get Seth to battle on his own turn, the more free reign that Jonathan has on his own, the less concerned he has to be about getting comboed out.
Yeah, this 2-for-1ing plan, definitely what John wants to be doing. And he's jumping on the fact that Seth didn't have land 6 there.
Right.
Land 6, pretty important, as playing a Deceiver Exarch with 3 mana up is one of the ways that Seth can actually gain card advantage back from Jonathan. Right now we have a judge call going on, so while those players are taking care of that, we're going to bring you back into the booth. This is top 4 coverage right now. Seth Manfield versus Jonathan Sukenik. Jonathan up a game right now in the top 4 of the Modern Open here. So recapping what we've seen so far, it's been what a game of land go almost the entire way through.
Right, you're seeing sort of some chess clock, some chess magic. You don't get to see it a lot in Legacy because the counter spells are mostly soft counters. They're not good for the entire game. And in Standard, there just isn't the plethora of good counter spells to have this kind of fight. In Modern, there's a lot of high-quality counter spells. A lot of them come from a different era of R&D, cards like Cryptic Command, Remand, Mana Leak, cards that wouldn't get printed right now. And there's a really interesting chess game that goes on between these 2 players because they can load up on counter spells. They can try to fight battles over particular things. Jonathan has to be worried at all times about Seth killing him out of nowhere. On the other side, Seth kind of has to push the envelope a little bit at various spots because letting both players draw cards the entire day favors Jonathan. And as a result, even though a lot of the magic is play a land, say go, there's a lot of interesting maneuvering that's happening.
We are back into the match here. So we still have Electrolyze on the stack here. This is on Seth's end step, Jonathan decided to Electrolyze the Vendilion Click. And we'll see. It looks like Seth actually does want to fight over this Electrolyze. So he's going to do that. Tapping 4.
Well, as you mentioned, Seth has just missed a land drop here, so he is somewhat obligated to try to pick a battle here because the Electrolyze is really bad if it resolves, and he needs to do something to get his action out of the hand.
Yeah, Cryptic Command. Now he knows about these mana leaks from Jonathan. And oftentimes that is in these land go mirrors. It seems to me the first player that misses a land drop basically is the guy who has to start casting things.
Yeah.
And in this game, it's been Seth. So now that he's out of lands, it's time to fight with the cards we have. The longer he waits, Jonathan will just get better cards.
Particularly when Cryptic Command and Remand are in play, because those cards are so powerful against people who are missing land drops.
And we'll see when that Jonathan wants to fight. Looks like he's going to go for Mana Leak. On the other side of the bracket, we have a result for you. Still undefeated right now. This is Gerard Fabiano, 2-0. He defeats Jeffrey Fallenus. So Seth, now the remaining twin player in the tournament. In the finals, we have Gerard's Sultai control deck, looking to add another trophy to his collection for this year.
I mean, in the last stretch of months, we've seen a Grand Prix win, an Open Series win, runner-up at the Players' Championship. Gerard has just been on fire. And
basically all of them with Sultai. The Grand Prix, even drafting Sultai.
Building decks of his own design, too. He's not just cribbing lists off of a website. He's brewing himself. I mean, it's just an incredible run.
Mana Leak for the Cryptic Command from Jonathan Sukenik. Does Seth have a Spell Pierce or Dispel, some way to fight back? He knew the Mana Leak was here when he picks the fight. You have to think he's got something.
Oh, right. I mean, the writing's on the wall. Jonathan was loath there to cast the Mana Leak, but he just kind of has to cast it there.
Yep, and it was Spell Snare. So Seth does win the counter war. He gets to draw his card off Cryptic Command and keep his Vendilion Click. And now we're back to Jonathan needing to have an answer. Jonathan with a pretty sweet draw of his own. It is his one-of copy of Sphinx's Revelation. And he could fire it off right now for 3. That's pretty strong. I don't know if we'll see whether or not he wants more value, and it looks like he does.
It's also just dangerous for him to tap out and cast Sphinx's Revelation when the threat of Blood Moon is on the other side of the table.
Certainly true as well.
You can draw all the cards you want if you can't cast them.
Vendilion Click for Seth. That's going to get Path to Exile from Jonathan. This is actually one of the situations where Path to Exile, to me, feels like card disadvantage.
Well, it is straight up card disadvantage. Often the land doesn't matter, but in this sort of game where you're trying to chain together multiple counterspells at the same turn, where Seth has missed land drops, where Mana Leak is in your hand, this is a big cost, but I don't think Jonathan could just sit here all day long and get hit with this Vendilion Click. His hand's a little bit forced.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it seems like the fight here is about card advantage. Jonathan tried to get the 2-for-1 with Electrolyze, but the game went where Seth scored the 2-for-1 off Cryptic, and now Jonathan then forced to use a Path to Exile in a less than ideal way. It just seems like all the spells this game at least are resolving slightly in Seth's favor.
Right, and part of that is because Seth has a game plan now that does not involve Splinter Twin, so he can play just a much more natural, card advantage, card drawing, counterspell kind of game.
And that path is going to work. Vendilion Click Exile, Seth gets another island, and we're back to an empty board. Seth will start to rebuild. Serum Visions is the play. Right here, so we'll see what he's going to rebuild toward. Looks like he may actually have one of his copies of Blood Moon in hand to fight over. If he can get to enough land, he can cast that through Mana Leak, which would force Jonathan to use his Counterflux on it.
Right, again, no rush from Seth's side of the field. He can continue to play this kind of draw-go game and try to dead that Mana Leak, but definitely a powerful weapon for him to have at this point.
The big payoff card in Jonathan's hand, as we saw, the Sphinx's Revelation. Going to be a pretty hard card to resolve in this matchup, but once Jonathan gets to enough mana, he can get some value off it.
It is a way for him to just initiate a fight at the end of Seth's turn. It may not eat a very good counterspell, but it's at least something. The more instants that Jonathan has access to, the better. Sorceries are just a big cost for him.
Draw for turn for Jonathan was Mana Leak. He fetched for Blood Crypt on the end step there. Sacred Foundry to play Jonathan at 7 lands. Hand is a bunch of counterspells and Sphinx's Revelation. But really, few threats in this one. And I've actually noticed that Jonathan has yet to draw a card like Lingering Souls. I'm wondering if he keeps the full set in.
I think that he needs to keep some amount of that in the deck, just so he can win the game in time. He doesn't want to go all day long, but we saw game one, they were a little bit on the clunky side early on. Later on, they get good enough to be able to cast, but early it's tough.
Yeah, and now Seth's starting to bully here. You see Snapcaster Mage probably just going to flashback something like Serum Visions.
Yep. As you mentioned, just happy to bully here, just trying to generate card advantage.
It's a 2-for-1.
Jonathan's running low on resources, and some of those resources are mana leaks, which are quickly becoming worse. And if the Snapcaster Mage goes uncontested, great. You're getting him into bolt range, and if it eats a card, that's great too.
Yeah, it's a free 2-1 for Manfield. The more cards, the later this game goes, the more those mana leaks stop being cards. This is a great strategy for Seth. Goes ahead and plays that here. He's at 15. And a 2-1 with Jonathan 11 is not a trivial card. And we're going to see Jonathan go for an end-step flashback of Mystical Teachings. That will get a remand out of Seth's hand.
Yeah, and Seth trying to save those remands as much as possible for cards on the flashback, whether it's Lingering Souls, Mystical Teachings, something there's Snapcaster Mage.
Draw for a turn for Jonathan is Lightning Helix. That'll take care of Snapcaster Mage, but the 2-for-1 will still be realized by Seth. And right now, Jonathan could Revelation for 2 with Mana Leak up. Still feels like maybe once he gets 2 more lands in play, Jonathan can start picking fights over this Revelation, but he still feels like he's short on lands to do that.
Exactly. I think Jonathan right now is best served trying to keep the board as clear as possible, allow himself the opportunity to make some land drops, and make that Revelation a real thing.
So you see here, Mana Leak, Counterflux, Sphinx's Revelation, Lightning Helix in John's hand. 7 lands in play. Has a Snapcaster Mage across the table from him. Life total at 11. And we'll see how he chooses to approach this one. Doesn't have too much options. He really just needs to, his spells are so reactive.
Yeah, I mean, he has the option of just trying to say go and revelating, but if Seth has any sort of response, it's just a turn burned off. And I think that Jonathan's hand is so anemic outside of the Sphinx's Revelation that he's got to try to get a little more out of it. He can't just trade for a piece of permission out of Seth's hand.
All right, Lightning Helix takes care of Snapcaster Mage from Jonathan. Still has 5 mana up, can pass back. Has the mana to both Mana Leak and Counterflux this turn, so he has 2 counter spells up. We go back over to Seth, and it's going to be a copy of Spellskite for him. Card we weren't entirely sure if Seth would board in here, as it is one of the few cards that Jonathan does not have to answer, but could be pretty good here. Jonathan with no removal just right now.
Well, a lot of Jonathan's removal are bolts, and it looks like Seth's leaning much more on Vendilion Click and Snapcaster Mage in these post-board games.
And Jonathan just with another land into play, passes back. They're trading lands right now is an interesting spot for Jonathan, right? He makes his Sphinx's Revelation better, but makes his Mana Leaks worse.
Right. I think on the balance, it favors Seth because, Jonathan's reaction is all Mana Leaks here. Seth is in a position where he can start pushing on Jonathan a little bit, trying to force through the kill. Definitely more attractive now with the Spellskite in play.
And it's going to be Pestermite on the end step for Seth with a full 5 mana up. And Jonathan going to try to tap Seth down a bit. Here comes a Mana Leak. Seth will pay. And another Mana Leak from Jonathan. He kind of figured that this would have to happen, that these Mana Leaks would end up 2-for-1ing himself.
Right.
Legacy players, your pairing.
Will Seth continue to fight is the question here. If he stops now, he gets his 2-for-1. He may just actually want the Pestermite to resolve.
He may. He also just might say, especially if he has another Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch, you say, okay, that's fine, and untap, say go, and try again next turn.
Oh, looks like Seth wants to fight. Could remand his own Pestermite.
Just keep playing that card advantage game.
Yeah, once the Pestermite's in play, it's stronger than it would normally be because it's going to be protected by that Spellskite. And do you think Seth has left in any copies of Splinter Twin?
I think that he's probably, south of 4 copies, but I think he has more than 0.
And we see remand on the Pestermite. That's the play. Seth not happy with just the 2-for-1. He wants the 2-for-0 here.
Yep.
And he'll get it. Jonathan now with the option. He could Revelation for 2 on end step. That gets 1 2-for-1 in Jonathan's favor, but looks like he needs that card to do more.
Right, and this is the problem. You know, Jonathan's, the cards he has are just deteriorating in value so much. The only thing he really has left over is this Revelation, and it's just hard to imagine it resolving given how long Seth's been saying go for, all the mana he has available, the cards he's looked at.
Now Seth is going to fight. Here is Blood Moon. This was the real payoff card. He knows Jonathan has a counterflux. There's no way Jonathan can just let this resolve.
I don't know. He can. I mean, he's got 2 islands and a plains, and the thing is, things are getting so bad for Jonathan. You know, you saw the Pestermite trying to push on Jonathan a little bit last turn, that he might say, I just had to play through the Blood Moon because if I try to pick a fight over this right now, I'm just going to lose the game. On top of that, Seth could just follow up with another copy of Blood Moon, and then your counterflux was for naught.
Blood Moon is still on the stack. It looks like Jonathan will end up going for the counterflux, leaving just Sphinx's Revelation in his hand.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan's just in a rock and a hard place. If the counterflux, if the Blood Moon resolves, that's really, really bad. And if he loses his counterflux here and is just left with Sphinx's Revelation, that's really bad as well.
It looks like he's actually going to float the mana, let the Blood Moon resolve, and then Seth can move through combat to empty the mana pool.
Right.
Jonathan does have cards that answer Blood Moon, I suppose.
Yeah, his Wear Tear is still alive, for example, his Celestial
Legacy
Purge.
players, if you do not have a player sitting across from you, please raise your
can fight
hand
another day over this
find
Blood
their
Moon.
match.
And that's what he's going to do. So now he has Island, Plains, and a bunch of mountains. In theory, he could still cast the Sphinx's Revelation, though it would take all his non-red mana to do so.
Right, he's got island, plains, plus a bunch of mountains.
Third card drawn from Jonathan. You
With
just feel Seth incrementally gaining advantage here.
Right.
I want to remind you that the only way to determine a winner of a match
And as I mentioned before, I'm not optimistic of the Sphinx's Revelation's ability to resolve.
Do not roll a die. Put the point
It's interesting. So Jonathan's at 9 lands in play. We still feel like Revelation can't work here. Does the card even really work in the matchup?
I think that any instant is fine, just because of the way the games play out. It is definitely not his best card in the matchup, but I think that it's probably better than a lot of his, some of his bolt effects that aren't very efficient.
It's never going to resolve. I guess it's going to get you a counter spell most of the time.
I wouldn't say it's never going to resolve. It's hard pressed, but I just like keeping it as many instances as possible.
The instants do just create pressure here. Go over to Seth here. He's going to play that Pestermite on end step. See, looks like he's going to go after one of the islands. And that will take Jonathan off the counterspell. I mean, once you let the Blood Moon resolve, you're kind of locked into counterfluxing the first thing that happens. And Jonathan, okay,
Right.
well, sure, if the Pestermite's there, he's just going to Sphinx's Revelation for the whole load. This is going to be a Revelation for 6. And Seth will have a negate. Jonathan will be tapped out. We'll go to Seth's turn. A Splinter Twin will win the game for Manfield. And there you go. On to game 3. And Seth really understanding that game, and I think playing it very well.
Yeah, exactly. I really think the addition of Blood Moon changes the way the matchup goes so much because, you know, game 1, Jonathan just has a certain comfort in knowing that if he's ever able to keep the Exarch and the Pestermite off the table going into Seth's turn, nothing too bad can happen. Seth can have some good turns, he can have some good exchanges, but at the end of the day, he's not at risk of losing the game. Now with Blood Moon in the deck, it just really changes things from Jonathan's side of the table. He has to be a lot more judicious over whether or not he's picking fights over things like Pestermite, Vendilion Click, Deceiver Exarch, because Blood Moon can result in a game win just as easily as a Splinter Twin kill does.
All right, going back to the sideboard here. Almost felt like Jonathan's game plan there was pretty difficult. Like, he seemed to execute his game plan there, but just really wasn't enough in the situation. Is there another way he can approach things?
Not really. I mean, the other things he can do is bring in some 5-mana tap-out threats that aren't any good, like Gideon Jura or Baneslayer Angel.
Okay, that
Pretty
doesn't seem
bad.
like it'll do much.
Pretty bad against negates and remands and being killed on when you tap out and so forth.
He does have options of cards like Crucible of Worlds. Now that's been there, I would assume, for a lot of these really controlling matchups. He can recur stuff like Ghost Quarter, Fetch Lands, and Tectonic Edge. And in this situation, really having a Fetch Land with a Crucible of Worlds actually would be pretty decent for Jonathan.
He can go down that route, but I think that the Ghost Quarter plan is a bit of a long shot here.
Looking back at this, we see other cards in Jonathan's one of sideboard. Cards, a lot of them really earmarked for different matchups. We have stuff like Kataki, Stony Silence, things that don't really matter too much here.
So we are approaching the end of season 1. We just have Grand Prix Miami next week, and we're looking at Dallas and the Richmond Invitational. So it won't be that long until we are headfirst into season 2 of the Open Series. We'll be starting off in Syracuse in April, then Providence, Cleveland, and Seattle. These will all be standard opens. We move a little bit further to Dallas. Legacy Open will be in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then our first ever modern invitational, June 5th through 7th, season 2 invitational in Columbus, Ohio, tied to the Origins Game Fair. Modern and standard will be the invitational formats with a modern 2-day open series, just like we have here in Baltimore, June 5th through 7th, with me, you, and Cedric Phillips calling that one.
As the season 2 schedules, you mentioned it's one of the shorter seasons, but we have a lot of great tournaments here moving around the country. And yeah, our first modern invitationals. That will be a pretty big one. This is our first modern open, and part of the thing, Star City Games has moved modern into the open series this year.
Yeah, and what a response here in Baltimore. 762 players showing up, a lot of enthusiasm on social media. From what I understand, our viewership numbers have been great, bearing with me even as I lose my voice, slip into delirium, and all sorts of other things. Appreciate it very much. Always great to have so many people tuning in.
All right, well, we'll get back into our match. This is Jonathan Sukenik, Seth Manfield. They're going to game 3. The winner will face, well, Gerard Fabiano in the finals, playing, as to be expected, Sultai Control.
And Gerard with an opportunity to potentially go unblemished through the elimination rounds as well. A 2-0 against Jeff Hoagland, and then a 2-0 in the semifinals as well.
Yeah, defeating Jeffrey Fallenus, Blue-Red Twin. Gerard been on camera 3 times during the Swiss today and 2-0'd all of them. Actually, I'll correct that. I believe it was 4 times, winning them all 2-0. He has been...
Well, I'm trying to think of some game losses he picked up along the way. I think we might have seen, I think Ben Green might have gotten him with Treetop Village once.
Ben Green got him yesterday once. I believe that's it.
He's been largely unblemished on camera.
Yeah, Sultai Control deck. That idea of just going bigger to beat the Obzon decks and then having the right mix of spells to compete with Twin really has been paying off for him.
Just had a very impressive run, and you can see his sideboard is so geared to cleaning up his matchups against certain combo decks like Infect that seemed like a problematic matchup. All the 75 cards in this deck seem very well thought out.
I'll see if it can take it down. Well, who's going to play, though? We do not know. It's Sukenik versus Manfield. Sukenik will be on the play for the first time in Game 3. They split the first 2 games. Game 1 going the way of 4-color control. Game 2, Blue-Red Twin and Seth Manfield was able to take.
And I really like how Seth's post-board configuration looked. The Splinter Twin combo is still nice for him to have. It's something that he needs to be threatening at various stages of the game. But being less resilient on that combo, being able to just go into a pretty classic control shell, I think that's a really valuable option to have in the matchup, and post-board he gets to do exactly that.
Yeah, and it really seems like post-board, Seth knew exactly what he wanted to do in that game. From the beginning, the game plan he set up to slowly score 2 for 1s and really invalidate Jonathan's cards like Mana Leak just seemed to work.
Yeah, Seth did a very good job of navigating all those counterspell fights, and once he realized that Jonathan was on Mana Leaks, he was able to take a longer approach to the game, just play the lands, invalidate those Mana Leaks, which Jonathan got to do very little with. Eventually bully through a Blood Moon, and at that point, assembling the combos elementary. Jonathan just can't defend himself with a Blood Moon in play.
Yeah. So we'll get ready for Game 3. Those early turns, we've seen both players just set up with lands, and so the key cards, Game 1, Seth had a Desolate Lighthouse early, which seemed to be great for him, but it's almost, I'm not positive what Jonathan wants to get early. The Lingering Souls seems to be very good for him Game 1 at least.
Well, and I was about to mention that card exactly, because on the play, Jonathan can just cast it. The risk is Blood Moon, but he's not at risk of getting comboed out. But the problem that I saw in game 2 was Jonathan was never threatening Seth with anything. Jonathan was able to protect himself for a while with the counter spells, but Seth was never in a position where he had to respond to something proactive Jonathan was doing. And I think if Jonathan can get a Lingering Souls to resolve early, just get something going, it might put the ball in Seth's court to have to respond first. And that might be a position Jonathan can win from.
All right, some lands into play to start the game. Sacred Foundry from Sukenik. Seth Manfield gets Steam Vents, and we are underway here. Game 3 of the semifinals. Sukenik versus Manfield. Winner will take on Gerard Fabiano. And for Jonathan, just the big test right now is, can the players, I guess, make their land drops? Probably all the way up to 4 or 5.
Right, that's definitely stage 1 of this game. The first person who starts missing land drops, the pressure's on them to start casting stuff on their own turn. That plays right into counter spells. That's not where you want to be.
Yeah, interesting enough, Seth was the first one to miss a land drop last game, and actually that caused him to win the first counter war.
Right, well, he also had something very efficient to break serve with.
And it did have the ability to double counter spell in 1 turn.
Normally you need, a variety of land drops to be able to do that. But if you're playing a very efficient game with your counter spells, you have things like Spell Pierce and Dispel at the right time. Even if you miss land drops, you can still win the efficiency game.
And a very aggressive use of Remand here by Sukenik. Seth, before his land drop, went for a Thought Scour, and Sukenik went ahead and remanded it. Really just opting to cycle his Remand. Maybe he's shorter on lands.
Could be missing land drops, could be on Snapcaster Mage and wanting to just get a spell into his graveyard as soon as possible. There's a variety of factors.
And once that Remand happens, Seth is fine at resolving Serum Visions. Interesting that he switched up the cantrip he wanted to play after the Remand was down.
Yeah, very interesting.
Both those tapped. Seth still deciding on the Scry. This is on his 2nd turn. Looks like they'll both be going to the bottom, and we'll go back to Sukenik. Does he have that Lingering Souls you were mentioning? Does he want to play with the Fear of Blood Moon just to have one?
I mean, I think we saw last game that the holding pattern for the whole game for Jonathan is probably not a good place to be in.
So in that case, go ahead and go for the Lingering Souls if you have him. And it's just going to be Blood Crypt and Sukenik. No threat as of yet.
If Jonathan's got a very powerful hand, or if he thinks he can win the long game, then I can see just holding up for the time being. But if he does have Lingering Souls in hand, I think there is an argument for risking Blood Moon in that spot. Not necessarily, but it's something that Jonathan has to consider because he just needs to get something going.
Now, once again, Jonathan does have his 1 copy of Sphinx's Revelation in his hand. Still, that card that, if it ever does resolve, is a huge payout in this matchup for Jonathan. Meanwhile, Seth continues to trade lands, and he is aggressively finding his basic islands, something that he'll need to do if he wants to Blood Moon the game.
Right, he wants to Blood Moon and still be able to Cryptic Command or cast multiple counterspells in the same turn. So he's going to put a priority on getting as many basic islands as he can now that he has his Steam Vents to provide red mana for Blood Moon if it shows up.
And still those fetches on Seth's main phase, still being aware of the possibility of Shadow of Doubt. I love the amount of respect he is giving to the card.
Right, again, unlikely to still be there, but there's no reason to risk anything.
So 3rd land, does he actually have a play? We'll see here. He can play, it'll be into 2 mana from Jonathan. That's a lot of counter magic he'd have to play into. Mana Leaks, Remands. Even a copy of Negate.
All right, and I think Seth wants to initiate as much action as possible on the end of Jonathan's turn.
Yeah, as is with the twin deck, there's hardly anything that they really want to do at sorcery speed. So what Seth's going to do is going to go for a somewhat aggressive play, though. He's going to pass to Jonathan, and now he's going to pick a bit of a fight. On Jonathan's upkeep, it's going to be Deceiver Exarch from Manfield.
Now, if he's going after the island here, it doesn't necessarily mean that Blood Moon for sure sticks because Wear Tear and Celestial Purge are still players, but if Seth is just trying to bully Jonathan out of the game with Blood Moon, this Deceiver Exarch makes a lot of sense.
Well, either way, Sukenik's having none of it. Mana Leak will hit the Deceiver Exarch, and he'll pass back after playing Flood Strand. For Seth, that is one way to get the soft counters out of Jonathan's hand. As we saw last game, though, Seth was actually able to blank the Mana Leaks once he got very deep into the late game.
Right, but if he's trying to push this early in the game, I suspect he's trying to push through a Blood Moon. And if he has Dispel or Spell Pierce on top of a land in Blood Moon, he can do it right now.
Yeah, he's just going to challenge Jonathan on that 2 mana counterspells, just running Blood Moon straight into 2 mana on Jonathan's side, making him have something. Jonathan's going to fetch. The question is it going to be for a counterspell or for a basic plains?
And we will see momentarily here, but if Seth's doing this, I think it means he doesn't have a land drop. He would, at the minimum, want to threaten the ability to counter back.
Yeah, basic planes for Jonathan, so he doesn't have the counter spell. He could have possibly the Purge or the Wear Tear, but if not, this Blood Moon's going to go ahead and stick for Seth. And yeah, Blood Moon in play. So now Jonathan operating on just one island, one plains, everything else is going to be red.
Now, he can still draw to Celestial Purge or to Wear Tear. That's still on the table, but now the game is much easier to play on Seth's side of the table, even if he's missing land drops.
Yeah.
Not a lot for Jonathan to threaten.
Some of Jonathan's cards are turned off. His Sphinx's Revelation no longer works. Now, it's still problematic, it seems, that Seth is missing lands. But once he hits lands, these counterspell wars are all going to go in Seth's favor.
And the problem is that Jonathan can never push back in these counterspell battles because he's only got a single island to operate with.
He's got one counterspell.
So even if he has multiple counterspells in play, well, they're all off the table. And Cryptic Command is probably shut off the remainder of the game as long as Blood Moon's there.
Thought Scour from Seth. He's trying to dig for lands. I think he knows that if he can get his land drops here, he should be able to take this game. Thought Scour targeting himself. Mills his copy of Desolate Lighthouse, but that's not any help anyway. Blood Moon's already in play.
I mean, any land's a good land right now for Seth.
Yeah.
He'll take anything. He's not picky.
Go back over here. He did hit a land. It was an island. So now it has 3 up. And I'm wondering, if he even has to really pace things quickly here. As long as he makes his land drops, he seems like quite the favorite.
I mean, his hand's full of spells. So if he has a path for a kill, I'm sure he's going to take it. Though it's worth noting right now, he doesn't have access to double red mana. So a Splinter Twin kill is not currently on the table.
6th land from Sukenik is Tectonic Edge. But until he gets his one copy of Wear Tear, or I believe his one copy of Celestial Purge, those are his ways to knock Blood Moon off.
And there's only so much defending of himself Jonathan can do with red mana. So every Deceiver Exarch, every Pestermite is really problematic because it's going to tap down either a plains or an island. And at that point, Jonathan just doesn't have a lot of resistance in his deck.
Yeah, every Pestermite is pretty much a must-counter spell because otherwise they tap Jonathan off blue mana. And we're going to see that right now. Pestermite on the end step here. Can Jonathan fight over this?
Well, it's less pressure to fight over this because Lightning Bolt is still a card you can cast pretty easily. But as you mentioned before, Seth's just bullying on him in these spots where you can feel that if Jonathan does something about the Pestermite, that's fine from Seth's side of the table. And if he does nothing about it, Seth can start attacking. It's only a matter of time before he gets to double red. And Jonathan just can only react so much with most of his color mana cut off.
Jonathan cannot counter all of these cards out of Seth. We do see here, it's going to be Lightning Bolt. This is with the tap trigger. So the Pestermite resolves the tap trigger on the stack. And now he's going to use the blue mana to flashback to put Snapcaster Mage into play. And he'll probably give flashback to the Lightning Bolt, only so he can play. I don't know if he'll actually cast the Lightning Bolt.
I don't see why not, unless you have another Snapcaster Mage in hand. But if you're willing to cast the Snapcaster Mage, it feels like you're willing to cast the Lightning Bolt. There's not not much of a reason to do it otherwise.
Seth down to 15. And he gets to untap now for his own turn. Jonathan does have a threat. He may have to go on the aggro plan here. If the game goes late, he's not going to be able to answer all of Seth's threats.
Right. I mean, this is really the best that he can do. Seth's stalled on lands right now. He can't threaten a Splinter Twin kill until he finds double red. So I try to go on the aggressive. I mean, what's the plan otherwise? You can't hold off forever. You can't cast your counter spells. A lot of them you can't cast. Some of them are just getting worse over time. Remand and Mana Leak only hold off for so long.
All right, Serum Visions from Seth is going to try to dig him into more lands. Perhaps the right kind of action, something like a Deceiver Exarch could help him a lot. Just needs to stop this attack from Jonathan long enough for him to start making threats.
And Seth's got a lot of time at 15.
Yeah, plenty of turns to do this.
A lot of Jonathan's deck again turned off, and there's the second red mana now.
Yep, Scalding Tarn, remember, just a mountain because of Seth's own Blood Moon.
Now, Seth still has to be worried about Wear Tear, and he still has to be worried about Celestial Purge. It's not like this Blood Moon is guaranteed to be in play for the whole game, so that's another consideration as well. Pretty clearly, Jonathan has not had it. He's had some opportunities to go for it.
Right.
but the Blood Moon is not a hard lock to be in game for the entire, to be in play for the entire game.
2 damage across from Sukenik puts Seth down to 13, drawing another land. He'll pass. His draw for the turn actually was a Lightning Helix, so it's a castable card at the very least for Jonathan.
Sweet.
A card that can cast without using his only island. For Seth, it looks like it's still more set up, reaching for Serum Visions. But you see just a full grip of blue cards there for Manfield. Card draw off Serum Visions. And not to mention, it's not just that Exarch wins the game. It's also if Seth can land a Deceiver Exarch, this Snapcaster Mage no longer can attack, and Jonathan's kind of back to square one.
Right. There's a lot of ways, to put it mildly, for things to go wrong for Jonathan in this spot.
None of them happened so far, though, so we'll go back over to Jonathan's turn. He's got Seth down to 13. It's a long ways to go, but he's going to try for it. Snapcaster Mage swings in, puts Seth down to 11, coupled with the Lightning Helix in Jonathan's hand. Perhaps he feels like Seth is at 8. He could be 4 swings away. That's a lot of draw steps to dodge, but it's not impossible.
I guess an opponent who's been missing land drops the entire game, so a handful of spells.
Right. So okay, if he's not playing Exarchs, not playing Pestermites, what spells do you put him on? Counter Magic?
Friday counters things he's not willing to tap out for in the face of Mana Leak.
Yeah, the Mana Leak's still a hard counter at this point.
I'm getting the sense that Seth is just being extremely cautious here. It's not like he has nothing to do.
At some point, Seth can actually just start throwing cards into Jonathan's possible counter spells, and it just seems unlikely Jonathan would be able to counter them all. Vendilion Click cast for Seth. This is a main phase Vendilion Click from Seth. Jonathan will be, with the trigger on, will go ahead and Lightning Helix it. Does not want Seth to have something that can trade with Snapcaster Mage. And dare we see Seth remand his own Vendilion Click. We've seen him do that before when he was ahead. Close, but actually not. He'll just go ahead and negate the Lightning Helix.
And really challenging Jonathan to have the ability to react, and he's running out of ways to do so.
Right now, Seth is up cards and up mana. He's actually not pressuring Jonathan's blue mana too hard here, but what he is doing is pressuring the fact that Jonathan has drawn more lands and is running out of cards. So Dispel will take care of negate. Lightning Helix will take care of Vendilion Click. Jonathan up to 21. Now the Vendilion Click trigger will resolve. We'll see Jonathan's hand. It is land Sphinx's Revelation. I can't imagine Seth cares about either.
Well, I mean, Jonathan's got a big draw to an island, and then he can revelate.
Right, if Jonathan draws basic island, then this is huge.
Because again, no risk of dying next turn. Jonathan can just main phase it. The Blood Moon's already in play, so that ship sailed. Nothing to really worry about in that respect.
So will Seth let him take one chance to draw to it, or just get the Revelation out of there? It's so risky. I don't know. If you feel like you're really far ahead, you almost want to take the Revelation. He's going to give Jonathan a chance. Is this an island? It is not. It's a Mana Leak.
I mean, it's the
mission accomplished.
The other really nightmare scenario there is that he finds something like Wear Terror Celestial Purge paired with another card, and now all of a sudden it's a game again.
Yeah, absolutely. But Mana Leak gives Seth a chance to untap, protect himself once again from a giant Sphinx's Revelation. Seth goes down to 9 on the attack, and now he'll play Jace Architect of Thought. Jonathan shows, yeah, he did draw Mana Leak for the turn. That should take care of Jace. Does Seth want to fight? If he uses something like Remand to fight over the Jace, it means he's opening himself up to another top deck for that Sphinx's Revelation.
But Seth's hand might be good enough that even if Jonathan reds for a bunch, if the Blood Moon stays in play, Jonathan may not be able to push back on the hand that Seth has built up here.
Dispel from Seth Manfield looks like it's going to be the play. That's his last blue mana. That'll take care of Mana Leak. Jace resolves. Seth's going to go ahead and plus it to 5. And I pass back. Can Jonathan hit that island? He's got another shot at it. No.
We don't know that yet.
Attacks, and then post-combat, Windmill slams the island and just taps all the mana.
We don't know that yet, but probably not the island.
Jace down to 4. And Jace really has stopped Jonathan's attack. Passes the turns. Now it would be a really slow roll of the island.
Yeah. At that point, he's slow rolling himself. He's no longer a slow rolling Seth.
If you drew the island, would you keep your composure there? I would probably just be the big jerk and slam it.
First of all, you got to act like you've been there before. Second, there's a very good chance that Jonathan draws island, revelates for a bunch, and still loses.
Yeah, that'd be the worst. If you just
you can't windmill slam when you go from 5% to win the game to 10% or whatever. Act like you've been there before.
Up to 5 for Jace, back down to 4. Both players treading water here. Great news for Seth Manfield. Jonathan continues to play lands. Calm level of play from Jonathan, though.
Yep. I mean, he's trying to keep up his composure. The only hope that he has at this point is that Seth is playing around counter spells that I don't believe he has.
End step here for Seth. He's going to make a play with Cryptic Command. It's going to bounce the island and draw a card, I believe. That is a dangerous situation if he's making plays like this.
This is not a good sign.
He's going to resolve something good.
I mean, when your opponent can burn off a Cryptic Command like that, what that does mean is that now Jonathan can no longer draw the island and revelate next turn.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, he's still 2 turns away.
Keeps him off that Sphinx's Revelation. It keeps him off being able to win a potential counter war. And yeah, it does seem like Seth has chosen this for his moment here. The Jace now -2ing. You see Deceiver, Exarch, Remand, and Steam Vents.
Remand also a very good insurance policy in case that second island were to show up.
Yeah, but it's Deceiver Exarch. Not only is it half of his combo, but it blocks the Snapcaster range. Too hard for Seth to turn down. It's put by himself, but he'll take it.
And I think that's the death knell for Jonathan here because, you get the feeling he would just take Remand. He would just take Remand and keep up the Strago game if that was where he was at. But I think this means he's got a Splinter Twin to pair with the Deceiver Exarch, and he's likely to go for it next turn.
Even if he doesn't have the Splinter Twin, I think he may take it. I mean, 1/4 is great against 2/1. He can block the Jace and continue to activate it.
And I love this play from Seth. The Deceiver Exarch in the upkeep, likely tackling the plains. This means that Path to Exile is no longer a draw.
Andrew Boswell, 20 points.
And drop from Jonathan.
Garrick Mattis, 20 points.
He does have the island to replay, and we'll see where he can go from here.
Can't Path, he cannot break out of the Blood Moon with a Wear Terror Celestial Purge. And I think Seth's going to be going for it right about now.
Seth knows if he has Twin and a counter spell, this is going to be game. He reaches for lands, separating red from blue. I think he's going for all red lands, and that's going to be Splinter Twin on Deceiver Exarch. Jonathan can maybe try for a counter spell, but he knows it's going to be covered. And there you have it. Seth Manfield, 2-1, comes back from down game 1 to win 2 long games against 4-color control.
And Seth's post-board plan there seemed brilliant.